Hello everyone. In this video, I will cover 25 tips, tricks, and best practices for PowerApps specifically focused around app makers. So let's check it out in action. You can start with a blank app and connect to your data sources, or you can pick from some of the most popular data source options. And selecting the right data source is a key decision that needs to be made upfront. SharePoint lists or Microsoft lists versus Dataverse. There are some key considerations and differences between these data sources. What type of data are you trying to support? Relational, non-relational. Understand capacity limitations of your data source. Understand security concepts of your data source. And in PowerApps, you are not limited to one data source. You are free to connect to multiple data sources of your choice. When you connect to a specific data source, for example, if I search for SQL, it's important to keep in mind that certain data sources require premium licensing. SQL is a premium connector, and that is clearly highlighted in the Select a Data Source experience itself. SharePoint, as an example, is a standard connector. If you go to the details of your Power App, the license designation property will let you know if this app has been designated as a premium licensed app. Every user accessing the Power App will require a premium license. And being informed about the license that is designated to your account, under Settings, we have the option for Plans. This will highlight the licenses that your account has access to. Here in a different tenant, I own the per user license plan, which is the premium license plan. Now, as we can mix and match data from multiple data sources or create multiple connections to the same data source, as an app maker, I need to understand that there are certain recommendations around performance of Canvas Power Apps. One of the recommendations is to limit the number of data connections. Don't add more than 30 connections in one app. For this Power App, 8 connections I have made. Even though I'm connecting to the same data source like SharePoint as an example here, all of these connections are considered as separate connections because they are connecting to different lists. One good story around this scenario was where Microsoft HR uses the Power Platform to transform employee experiences. This app called as Thrive is the home app where the employee experience begins from. Employees can launch other Power Apps. For example, view the global holiday calendar or create vacation requests or give kudos. All of these are independent Power Apps, and the key is that the apps deep link into each other and can be launched directly from the web experiences. To launch a different Power App, I can insert a button control, leave request. On select, I will leverage the launch function to launch my specific Power App. When the user selects this button, it will straight out launch that specific Power App. Power Apps coding standards and guidelines that shares information around best practices like naming conventions for controls, code optimization techniques, and a lot more. You can see how my controls are just named randomly. Best practice is to follow a naming standard. As an example, for button controls, follow an abbreviation for it, like BTN. So this control of mine, which is launching, let's say, my finance application, I can rename this to BTN Finance App. And if I start following this naming standard throughout my app, if I want to search for certain aspects of my Power App and think about this from a maintainability standpoint as well, search for BTN, all of those button controls that I have named accordingly will show up in the search experience. Compare the naming standards of this screen versus a similar screen experience, but this time with controls named following the guidelines. For my header section, I can clearly look at the naming of the control itself and understand the action that that control would potentially take. This is an icon control that would generate a PDF of the screen. Comment your code. Very important from a maintainability standpoint. On select of this button, I have the formula that does the following. For the formula bar, the first part is to make it readable, and we have this option called format text. If I select this, it will automatically format all the formulas in this formula bar. For commenting, put // Here I can add a line comment. And I can do the same for other formulas. To write a block of commands, you can use /****. To write formulas in the formula bar, as we start typing, IntelliSense will provide the formulas that are available based upon the input that we've provided. For example, here, there is a function called lookup. However, we have this PowerFX option available, which if you click on, you can browse through all the available functions that are provided. You can select the function and it will describe what that function specifically does. Text-based functions, datetime-based functions, information functions, and a lot more. For any of these functions that you select, there is a link to learn more. If you click this, it will take you to the documentation for the PowerFX formula reference. And this documentation has all the formulas listed out from A through Z. And if I select a specific alphabet, it will list out all the formulas related to that. Let's take an example of concatenate function. If I select this, it will provide a lot more details about that function, its syntax, how can I use it, with examples that you can go and try out. New formulas and features keep getting added to the PowerApps Studio experience. One of the new formulas is known as the PDF function that allows us to generate a PDF of a screen, a gallery, or a container control. Now, to keep up to date with new features and formulas, under settings, if you go to support, you have the authoring version for your PowerApp. This normally is the recommended version, which is the most stable recent version that has been released. If you go to see all PowerApps versions, it will take you to the documentation around released versions for PowerApps. Here you can pick your region and pick the specific version. I can see what was documented as part of that specific version's release. Plus, you can look at the release planner for Power Platform. I can look at what's planned, what dates are they supposed to go GA, generally available, what features are coming soon, what new features are available for me to try out. Canvas apps allow us to build pixel perfect apps. Here I have a screen where I've added certain set of standard controls. That same screen is what I have changed to this experience. We have a standard set of themes that are provided for us that we can leverage. Currently, there is no option to create custom themes. The Center of Excellence toolkit has a theming component, which has a theme editor Power App where you can define the theme of your app, and then you can export that theme and leverage that sample app file to create your new apps so that you have a standard branding theme to begin with. PowerApps has an HTML text control. This I have leveraged to create background gradient and box shadow effect. And this I have done by leveraging simple HTML. Plus, if you need UI inspiration, I typically go to Dribble. This specific dashboard interface is what I leveraged to showcase my total ticket count and the different statuses. Here's another design that shows list data. This design is what I replicated for my gallery control. There are also designs that have multiple screens. And a similar experience is what I tried to create in my Power App. If you're running your app in the web browser experience and you do not want the top nav bar, if you simply add hide nav bar is equal to true, this will go and hide the top navigation bar. For Power Apps that are built in Dataverse for Teams, here the controls leverage the modern Fluent controls. You can actually copy them, head over to your Power Apps and paste that control right here. So now I get this modern calendar experience directly in my Canvas Studio. We have the ability to create components. These can be local components, meaning they are local to the Power App, or these can be global components by creating them inside a component library. Here I have a component library that has various components: dialog, a bar component, left navigation component, and more. When components was announced, there were 10 reusable components that were provided for us to get started with. And some of these components is what I have leveraged in my components library. The Creator Kit has a common set of components that you can take advantage of: navigation, grid controls, pop-ups, and more. I've created a screen. I need a header. I'll go to Add, go and get components from component libraries. Select the components that I need, click Import. Those components will line up under Library Components. And now all the maker has to do is just select it and start configuring it. Here is a header control where I can provide the text for my header as an input property. It already shows the current logged in user's image. For the app logo, I can upload an image to my app. I already have one. I can simply go and connect to that. I need a left navigation. I pick left navigation, and here is a nice left navigation component for me to begin with. These are all configurable. I will give this a background color. There is a nav items property where I can define the navigation items, and my component will automatically reflect the change. And on similar lines, I'm free to add my dialog control component, cage component, and a lot more. Delegation is the ability for the Power App to delegate the work of performing the query to the underlying data source. Working with large data sets requires your data sources to be delegable. In Power Apps, under Settings, in the General tab, we have the data row limit that has been defined. By default, that number is 500. It can be expanded to 2000. You cannot go one beyond that. This number basically means that if the query that is being performed by Power Apps, if that is not delegable, at that moment, Power Apps has to do the work. And if Power Apps has to do the work for that query, it would be limited to a small data set only. The data sources that currently support delegation are as follows, which also means it's extremely important to pick a data source that is delegable if you are working on scenarios or solutions that require large data. And for each of these delegable data sources, the documentation clearly defines which actions are delegable and against which column types they are delegable. In this Power App, I have a SharePoint list called Students that's connected, which has over 5,000 records in the SharePoint list. I have a gallery, the items property for which is that specific students list. Now this technically is a query, select star from my students list. The list has over 5,000 items, but if you keep an eye out on the gallery count, it says 100. And as the user starts scrolling to the bottom of the gallery, Power Apps will load data in batches of 100. Track the behavior of how this works. Under Advanced Tools, there is a monitor tool that helps monitor activity within your app to understand performance and identify bugs or bottlenecks. Here, as I start scrolling down to the last item of the gallery, it will load data in batches of 100. So the monitor experience will actually show you those queries that are being performed, the request that is being made, and the response that is being received. It's a great way to track and monitor how many queries back and forth is your Power App making. I have a text box here, and let's say I would like to change this query to search in my students list. The text in that search text box is in the title column of my SharePoint list. Now observe, the moment I do that, I get these two blue lines that state that there is a delegation warning in my formula. You will observe how my gallery has loaded 500 records and nothing beyond. And if I was to perform a search operation, PowerApps will only search within that defined data set. Even though my SharePoint list has over 5,000 items, PowerApps will not perform that search. Always keep an eye out for delegation warnings. The app checker under formulas will clearly highlight any of those delegation warnings. The recommendation is to not add more than 500 controls in your app. Reason being, PowerApps generates an HTML DOM object for each control that you render on your screen. I have added 5 button controls, and imagine this is my navigation for my Power App, and I intend to build 10 screens, so that's 50 controls just in my Power Apps to drive the navigation aspect. The same experience I can also create by leveraging a gallery control, in which I can add a button control. And for the items property of the gallery, I'll simply provide an array of 5 names. And for the button controls text property, I will use this item.value. So as you can see, it's generated the same output of creating 5 buttons. Anytime you repeat certain things over and over again, you have to think about galleries. Here, I'm leveraging 2 controls, which is a gallery control and a button control, that replaces an experience of creating 5 buttons. In this Power App, my left navigation is a component, and this component leverages that same concept of a gallery purely because I wanted to repeat the menu pattern over and over again dynamically depending upon tabular data that the user provides to build out that specific menu. Here's another example of where I've leveraged gallery and a button to create multiple button controls, or to create a tabbed-like interface. PowerApps has a function called onStart, which is the first function that gets called when the user starts or loads the app. If your app takes a lot of time to load, take a look at the number of actions that you have incorporated in onStart. Here you need to be careful about overusing variables or overusing collections, because the more logic you add to load data into collections, the more time the app is going to take to load all that data locally. One function that you can take advantage of specifically in App OnStart is the concurrent function, which allows us to run actions concurrently. I have a certain set of functions. Button executes sequentially, and here I'm executing those same set of functions in a concurrent manner by simply decorating my function calls in a concurrent function. The same technique is what I have leveraged in App OnStart. Here I'm creating a collection to drive the menu of my Power App. I know the app menu is not going to change during the course of the user leveraging the Power App. Any branding aspects related to my Power App, I can store them in a variable. Another common aspect is querying Office 365 users. Get me the current logged in users manager. Now, if you need the details of a user's manager over and over again throughout your app, you do not want to keep repeating that formula. Better option is to store it in a variable upfront so you can leverage it throughout the course of that specific app session. Another thing to always keep an eye out on is the app checker. Here, under performance, you can see the different warnings, unused variables. So if I select this, it will let me know that there's a specific variable here that I have not used. If I go to search and search for that specific variable, I can see that I've set this variable on App OnStart, but I've never used it. So I can simply just go and comment this out or remove this. Unused media files. Under media, if I go to 3 ellipses, there's an option to remove any of the media files that is not being leveraged anywhere in this specific Power App. If the current logged in user is not Reza, then show this variable, else hide this variable. Now this condition itself is going to result in a Boolean value, which is true or false. Adding this extra if condition to it can also impact performance. PowerApps has to evaluate this function if, then it will evaluate the condition, and then it will go and apply the necessary true or false value that you've defined. If I replace this function simply with my condition itself, the output would still be the same because this function will return a Boolean value. Resetting controls. Here I have 4 controls that I would like to reset. And the standard pattern we apply is this: reset control 1, reset control 2, control 3, and reset control 4. So if I was to enter data and click reset, they will all go back to their original values. A faster way to do this would be as follows. When the reset button is clicked, I will set a variable called var reset to false, and then I will set that same variable back to true. I can hold the control key and select all my controls that I would like to reset in one go. With all of these controls selected, I will search for their reset property and change all of them in one go to var reset. Now, if I have filled data and if I click reset, the experience would be same, but if you notice, the formula is a lot cleaner to maintain and manage. Now, rather than writing all these nested if-else conditions, I can simply change this entire function to a switch condition by using the formula switch. Switch that variable. If that variable is new, show new data. If that variable is pending, show waiting for approval. So the output is the same, but the formula is a lot more efficient since it's not doing all these nested if-else calculations. Repeated formulas. Here is an example of a label where I would like to show the current logged in user's manager's name and their email address. I am querying the Office 365 users connection to go and get the user's manager information. And this I'm doing 2 times right here in the same formula. I can leverage the with function to create a scoped variable. I'll call the scope manager. I will perform the query to get the user's manager, close the scope, and for the formula, I can simply use this scoped variable to get the display name and to get the mail. Now observe, the output is the same, but the formula is ensuring that I'm querying Office 365 users only once to get the user's manager, and then from that object, I am fetching the display name and the mail. A classic example is a gallery that is connected to a form control. When I select an item in the gallery, the form control showcases that specific data. And the way we do this is, for the form controls item property, we leverage gallery.selected. This gallery is living in a different screen. When dependent formulas are plugged in, PowerApps would load both the screens and memory at the same time, and that impacts performance. A better option is to use variables. When I select this button to take me to that specific screen, I can set a variable, let's call it var item, and I will save the current context of the gallery item to this variable. For the form controls item property, I can simply leverage that variable. And now the behavior is exactly the same, but there is no control dependency. In this gallery control, I have a label control that performs a lookup, which is also a query against the data source. It's a separate list in SharePoint that's being queried. So I can go and grab information from this list where the title column matches the current gallery items class name. Now this is a very expensive operation purely because a gallery will show multiple records, and for each of these records, a query will be performed against my data source. This list, which is called my class list, if I can cache this data set directly in my Power App, which I could do directly on the OnStart of my Power App, where I'm querying the data source. Now, instead of this, I will simply perform that same query, but against my local collection. So this will be a lot more performant. If you have a gallery within a gallery, you need to be even more careful, because then you're getting into multiple scenarios where such challenges could come into play. Version notes. Whenever you make a change to your Power App, you go to save with version notes. These version notes are optional, but they could be extremely handy in tracking what changes were made from the previous version. For example, let's say in this scenario, I made modifications to the header component of my app. If I add that as the version note and save, for that Power App, if I head over to details and versions, that version note is what I can see right here. So when I'm reverting to a specific version, or if I would like to see a historical series of notes as to what changes were made, this is extremely handy. Another key tip is to publish your apps regularly. If you go to the app version history, if I go to see more options for version management, here I have the ability to revert to a previous version. But the key thing is, it's only possible to restore app versions that were created in the last 6 months. So if I go prior to 6 months, notice I'm not able to restore that specific version. If you enjoyed this video, then do like, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And thank you so much for watching.